Hello, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to Hotline 21, CAN TV. My name is Angelica Guillen, and I am a counselor with Connections for Abused Women and Their Children. That's CAWC. Today we are going to be talking about domestic violence, and I invite everyone to call us in with their questions. You can do so at the number that's at the bottom of your screen at 312-738-1060. Again, so for the next 25 minutes, I'm going to be talking about domestic violence. I'm going to be talking a little bit about our program and how to get services if you wanted more information on services. And you can also give us some questions or call us with questions at the number that's at the bottom of the screen. Again, that's 312-738-1060. And first I wanted to talk a little bit about what is domestic violence. So domestic violence is about power and control. Domestic violence can happen by when one person uses tactics that are abusive in their manner towards another person to gain power and control over that person. So I'll talk a little bit about what those tactics look like. But again, domestic violence is ultimately about power and control, and that's something that when we talk to clients, we try to make sure that they understand that domestic violence is about power and control, because a lot of the times there is that guilt, or people do start to believe that it is their fault that the abuse is happening. And one of the things that we want to do from the very beginning is explain to clients how domestic violence is perpetrated against them by using power and control. So domestic violence can happen within relationships. It can be with someone that you're in a relationship with. It can be with someone that you share a common dwelling. So if you live together, it can be from if you share or there's an alleged child that you have together with another person. And it can be from a caregiver or from a caretaker to someone that receives care. Specifically, I think we sometimes tend to forget that elderly people can also be part of domestic violence. Whether, again, that be because of their partner or because of a caregiver. Furthermore, domestic violence can affect literally everyone. The gender doesn't matter. Sexual orientation does not matter. The socioeconomic status does not matter. Age doesn't matter. Your religion doesn't matter. Your education level doesn't matter. I think sometimes when we think about what are some of the myths about domestic violence, one that I hear very often is that, domestic violence only really happens to people that are poor, and that's not true. Domestic violence, as I said before, affects everyone across the board, and so specifically, I think for us, we've seen at the shelter definitely come, different kinds of women from all walks of life into our shelter program. And again, domestic violence is about power and control, and it's a learned behavior. So it's something that an abusive person is going to learn to use against, another person to maintain some control. And so again, it doesn't really matter, who is exerting the power, and that person is going to be abusive either way. Domestic violence can absolutely happen to someone more than once. I think sometimes that is very difficult for people to sort of process through. I know that sometimes people will think that, I'm attracting these kinds of people, right? And through counseling and having our support groups at the shelter, we talk to women about how that's not the case, right? But again, I think it's important to keep in mind, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in terms of how that works for victims of domestic violence. So as I said before, there are tactics that are used to maintain control, rather to gain control and use that control to have some power over the other individual. Domestic violence can be emotional, it can be sexual, physical, financial, and psychological. So emotional domestic violence can usually is someone being like, the person will make you feel bad. They will talk bad about your physical appearance. They will talk about you in front of other people, in front of their friends. They'll put you down. They will put you down in front of your children. Maybe withdrawing love and support, emotional support, especially during times where things might be tough, and usually a partner would be supportive to their partner. Usually we see that that's not the case, and that would be the time where they sort of withdraw their affection. Emotionally can also include isolating someone, which kind of goes hand in hand with psychological abuse as well. They sort of mesh in together. Isolating someone is a tactic that happens quite often, and has proven to be something that abusers will use time and time again. And the reason for that is because once a victim has been isolated from friends and family members, the abuser then sort of has all of that power and all of that control over the other person. Say there's an incident of abuse, and the person has decided to leave the relationship or their home. If they have no family, no friends, no one that believes them, no one that's supporting them, where will they go? So if they have made that decision to say, well, I'm going to leave my relationship, and they've been isolated from everyone that's around them, everyone that once supported them emotionally, perhaps financially, and all of those people are now gone. They're completely isolated from all of their support system. Well, in that case, the abuser probably tends to win, because the victim has nowhere to go, and they will either decide to stay while they can come up with a better plan, and thus the abuser will continue to be abusive to their partner. Sexual abuse, I think, is something that can be very taboo to talk about. It's not something that we usually either think about or talk about quite often when we talk about domestic violence. I think even, as I mentioned before, I'm a counselor at the shelter, and I think even while we're there, sometimes it's kind of, when we're talking to someone, we ask them, was there sexual abuse in your relationship? And a lot of the times people will say no, and I think it can be a little bit about, well, that is my partner, and that's something that we're supposed to do. But when we start talking a little bit more, perhaps explaining what sexual violence looks like, what people feel like when they're in a sexual violence situation, we find out that sometimes people will come out and share and say, hey, listen, this person would make me do things that I didn't specifically feel comfortable with, or this person would make me feel bad about me not wanting to do certain sexual acts. So I think it's important to recognize it as domestic violence, and to be able to allow people to be open about that and share it with someone. Physical domestic violence, it's physical. It can mean punching, pushing, shoving, spitting at someone, keeping them locked in their house, in their apartment, in their room, in the bathroom. Even physically isolating someone from family and friends can also be physical. Hurting someone with objects, hurting someone with weapons, using any kind of props to hurt someone can be categorized as physical domestic violence. Financial domestic violence, again, is one of those things that I think that we don't tend to think about a lot. And it's one of the topics that I most definitely, and I know all of the rest of the counselors at the shelter, we try to talk about this with our clients all the time, is, listen, if your partner has ever prevented you from getting a job, if your partner has ever gotten sick, for example, right before you have this new interview at a job, and there's been these patterns of domestic violence in the past, it's very likely that your partner is being financially abusive, in that you're not allowed to succeed financially. You either end up losing your jobs because this person is physically abusive, and you know what? People don't want to show up to work with a purple eye or bruises on their arms or on their body. And as much as people will try to hide it, cover it up, make up lies, it comes to a point where it's either going to be very obvious or you're out of lies. And so when you start missing work, when you start making up excuses for why you can't show up for work, people sometimes end up losing their jobs. And in this way, the abuser has become, or in this way, the abuser has used financially abusive tactics to either keep you home or not allow you to have any kind of financial stability. Again, this goes back to, well, if a victim ever wanted to leave, and as you recall earlier when we talked about not having any not having any family or friends as support, well, if you also don't have the money to get around, if you don't have family or friends and all of a sudden now you also don't have money, how would you take a bus to get to a shelter, for example? Or how would you take a bus to a family member's house if you don't have an income? And so again, these are ways in which the abuser will make sure that they have all the power and that they are able to keep that control over their partner or the person that in this case would be the victim. Psychological abuse, as I said before, it kind of goes hand in hand with emotional abuse. Psychological abuse can also be convincing the person that they are crazy, or that they are imagining these things, that these things aren't really happening, that the domestic violence or the situation is really not that bad, that if maybe they didn't do this or they didn't do that, then maybe the situations wouldn't happen. Okay, so it seems like we have a caller on the line. Caller, you can go ahead with your question.
Hi, I was just calling to ask about domestic violence and men.
Okay.
Does it exist? And if so, like, what does the law say about that? Is the law the same for men and women, or can you please speak on that?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for your question. I think that's an amazing question. I think a lot of the times, one of the things that happens is that we usually think about domestic violence as something that only happens to women, and that's just not the case. I know that statistics recently have shown that usually 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence, and though the number is not as high for men, it absolutely happens, and it happens quite often. It happens, I believe it's 1 in 7 men that go through domestic violence in their lifetime, which is still a very staggering number. When it comes to the law, men are protected the same way that women are in terms of domestic violence. I know that specifically our program, CAWC, when men call to receive services, we do complete intakes with them. We will provide them with resources about things that they can do. Men obviously have children as well involved in relationships, and it's very important for us to be able to provide these resources. Unfortunately, there aren't any shelters in the city of Chicago right now that offer shelter services for men. But in terms of counseling and referrals and resources, all of that information is something that most programs will provide. Every program that works with domestic violence will provide, because as I said earlier before, domestic violence is across the board. It affects gender, age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and so these services are most definitely provided by all domestic violence programs. CAWC specifically, we do open up files for men that are going through domestic violence. So absolutely, if you know about anyone that is going through domestic violence, any men that are going through domestic violence, and they either have any questions, are looking for any additional support, any services, any legal referrals or services, please have them give us a call. What I will do right now is I will actually show you on our overhead right here our hotline number. So our hotline number is 773-278-4566. This is the 24-hour domestic violence hotline for CAWC. The hotline is actually picked up at the shelter, and so there's always going to be staff available that can pick up the phone and answer any questions. Anyone that calls, we'd be more than happy to answer any questions, provide them with any resources that they might need. Additionally, to receive more information, that would be cawc.org. And you can log on to get more information about our services, about who we are, what we do, the different kinds of programs that we have. So please call us. Any questions, any information, any referrals that you may have, give us a call. Any one of us would be more than happy to answer any questions or provide any resources. So it seems like we have another caller on the line. Caller, you can go ahead with your question or comment. Hello? Okay, I think it seems like we had a bad connection there. That's okay, caller. If you want to go ahead and call us right back, you can do that. Okay.
How can I support a friend or family member who is experiencing domestic violence?
Okay, thank you. That's a really good question. One of the things that I think is very important, and I actually just took a call yesterday, and I was talking to someone who knew of a friend. His wife had a friend who had just disclosed that she was in a domestic violence situation, and they were wondering what can they do to help this person. And the first thing that I said is, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for believing in her, believing that this is happening, because it seemed like there was maybe a mutual friendship. And I think that that's key. Believing the person when they tell you that they're going through domestic violence is one of the most important things that a friend or family member can do to be supportive to a victim of domestic violence. A lot of the times abusers have used their tactics so well and so efficiently that they have managed to convince themselves, sometimes the victim, and most definitely the people around them, that they are not abusive, or they've convinced other people that they would just never do what this other person is saying. They will just out forwardly talk to people and say, you know what, she's crazy, she's making that up, I'm not really doing that, like that's not who I am, that's not who I am. And so for that reason, I think it's very important to believe victims of domestic violence first and foremost. Secondly, I think it's very important to listen. A lot of the times, the first thing we want to do is be able to help, right? We feel like if this person is coming to me, then they're looking for help. So what can I do to help this person? And sometimes help feels like we have to solve the situation, and we don't have to do that. As helpers, I think it would be very important if we can listen to what the person is saying. I think that's very important, because the person going through domestic violence is going to tell you what they feel is the most important thing for them at the time. It could be legal issues, it could be issues concerning children if there are any children around. It can be a number of different things. And so for that reason, I think it's very important for us to listen and to be able to see, okay, this is what this person is saying that is very important for them, and this is what I need to make sure that I understand. So it seems like we have another caller on the line. Caller, you can go ahead.
How can I support a child or young person who is experiencing domestic violence?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. Unfortunately, a lot of the times children are involved in the situation, in a situation of domestic violence. And I think that's very important because children who are involved in a domestic violence relationship are in the situation through no fault of their own, just like the victim, right? They're victims themselves. And contrary to an adult who can call and seek services, a child cannot do that. And so I think that that's a really important question and a really important subject to keep in mind. Children need all of the support. I can tell you, caller, that if you know of anyone or any child that's going through domestic violence, you can call us at the number, at the hotline number for CAWC, which is 773-278-4566. There is services for children, just like there are for the victims of domestic violence. So the children can receive supportive services such as counseling. And when victims of domestic violence are going through situations of a legal process, they can include their children to be protected as well during incidents of abuse. Child custody cases and things like that are things that we can talk to someone about. We can refer them to legal advocates that can give them more information about what they can do to protect their children. And I think counseling is very important for children who are going through domestic violence and experiencing it, because as I said before, they need all of the support that they can get. And children are not able to reach out the same way that an adult can reach out. And I think it's very important for us to keep in mind that children also need a lot of the support, because sometimes people will say, my child is so small, I'm sure they don't know, I'm sure they really haven't seen what's going on. And that's not necessarily true. Children are very smart. Children listen to everything. Children see everything. And one of the things that I always tell people is domestic violence is a learned behavior. It was learned somewhere. And so we want to make sure that children, as they grow up, understand the difference between, a domestic violence relationship and a healthy relationship. And I think that acknowledging that a child is going through domestic violence and has experienced it, and that they need the services, is very, very crucial to that child being able to grow up in an environment where they feel safe, where they feel like they can be honest, they can talk about their feelings, and especially if the mother is involved in a domestic violence situation, that the child feels loved and cared for. So again, I'm going to show you the number to our hotline. You can give us a call at 773-278-4566 at any time. The line is 24 hours. If you call at any given time, usually you can even talk to someone that speaks Spanish. For anyone out there who knows of anyone that speaks Spanish and might be looking for services, please jot down our phone number. Pass it out, let people know. Let's talk about domestic violence. Let's open up the door for people to understand that, we want to make sure that people understand that domestic violence is happening, and we want our communities to be safe. And so if you just jot down our phone number, pass out the information, you never know when you might be able to come across someone who might need domestic violence services. The caller that asked about how family and friends can be supportive, this is one of the ways. Let's talk about domestic violence. Give out our phone number so that people can call and people can feel like they can reach out and ask questions about domestic violence, and they can share with someone who's not going to judge them, who's going to listen to them, and who's going to be able to provide them with whatever information it is that they are specifically looking for. So again, if you have any questions, please give us a call at our hotline. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and we will be here next month at the same time. And thank you very much.